And a very good morning. Oh, sorry, afternoon to you all. So, before we start with all the videos of like gaming and foodie and stuff, I thought I would explain to you why I'm. I forgot completely what I was talking about. I wanted to explain to you why I keep saying, oh, it's my FND. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This and that. In November of 2023, I finally got diagnosed with why I thought I was experiencing. I thought I had like MS or Parkinson's. MS is in my family. I mean, really in my family. I mean, like 4 or 5 people had it. They are gone now. But I thought that gene was coming around again. Coming around again. I mean, I just had fatigue. This is what I had: fatigue, numbness and tingling, loss of balance, spasms, tremor, pain. Sorry, I did have bladder problems, and I can't use the back barn door to save my life. Like maybe once a month. Um, so yeah, I had pretty much all of this, and I had like sometimes I was at the store and my whole body would be doing a jig. So after 3 disastrous pig of doctors, because they couldn't see it, um, they just couldn't see it on MRIs, on CAT scans, because with MS you can. There would be lesions, but there was nothing. So in November, I all summer I stood my ground and said, "Look, something is wrong with me." So they finally, I guess, state finally paid for me to go see a good doctor, and he did a couple of tests, and thankfully it brought out my episodes I was having. He said, okay, sit here, I'll be back soon." 10 minutes later, he comes back in, sits in his chair, and he goes, "I know what's wrong with you." And when he told me what he told me, I started crying. I started crying, and I felt like I wasn't hypochondriac. I wasn't stupid. It's like that episode of Golden Girls when Dorothy was finally diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. If you can't see it on a blood test, like or or if you can't see it, it's not there. You can't see the wind, but the wind is there. So he finally diagnosed me with functional neurological disorder. So I do also have ADHD, but this is not every this all everything I was going through was this. So we are going to look at a couple of videos and read a little on it.
Hello, my name is Dr. O'Neill. I'm a neurologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. I'd like to define a group of disorders called functional neurologic disorders. These are very common problems in the outpatient setting after headache. These are the most common thing that we see. They are defined as patients who are having neurologic symptoms. However, anatomically and structurally, the nervous system is intact. And despite the fact that that is true, the nervous system does not function in a normal way. The symptoms that patients can have range from a large number of difficulties. These can be weakness, numbness, tremor, episodes of loss of consciousness, or cognitive difficulties, to just name a few. This is a rule-in diagnosis, whereas the neurologist uses the clinical exam as well as other neurophysiologic tests such as an EEG, which is called a brainwave test, or MRIs, structural imaging, in addition to our neurologic exam, to provide evidence of incompatibility between the symptom and the recognized neurologic or medical condition. The symptom or deficit cannot be explained by another medical disorder, and this deficit causes clinical distress and impairment to the patients. I want to stress that this is in fact a brain disorder. We know from structural and functional imaging that the brain has demonstrated abnormal connections. So it's a connectivity disorder. And these connections can involve portions of the nervous system that have to do with motor planning, as well as the ability to recognize that that motor or symptom has been planned by self. It's a very complicated and common set of disorders. I hope this has addressed some of the concerns that you have.
So that is pretty much that was just one of the many videos. Why is functional neurological disorder so poorly understood?
The human brain is like a work of art. There are 80 to 100 billion neurons in the brain. That's about the same as the amount of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Each one of those neurons connects to thousands of others, creating trillions of connections in the brain. These electrical pulses enable us to have a sense of self, to control our bodies, and to perform thousands of intricate tasks with ease. Despite improvements in neuroimaging, we still do not have the capacity to study every single neuron. And in fact, our technology remains pretty limited. Even if we did have the capacity to study every single neuron, our technology at times hinders us. We forget about the real people that sit behind each and every brain scan. We become fixated on what we can see, and we forget the limitations of this technology. The human brain is actually as unique as our fingerprints, or at least the functioning of it is. And that's because the way the brain functions is shaped on our own experiences. The brain is actually that complex that it's relatively easy for it to become dysfunctional. And I say this because my fascination with the human brain did not stem from my own experience as an academic and as a researcher. It stems from my personal experience. I live with a broken brain. Specifically, I live with a flat brain. And living with FND has shaped my entire life. When I was 14 years old, I caught the flu. And for me, that was pretty great. Because although I was feeling rough, it was for once a legitimate reason not to have to go to school. See, for me, school was just one more place where I didn't fit in. I didn't belong, and I was not an academic. So having the flu was a legitimate reason for me not to go. Before I recovered from the flu, I developed glandular fever, a common viral infection, also known as the kissing disease. Perhaps another insight into how I spent my time instead of being at school. Before I recovered, I was paralyzed from the neck down within 2 months of developing glandular fever. I lost my ability to move and feel from the neck down. I lost my speech as well. Worse still, there was no explanation as to why. I was 14 years old. Do you remember what it was like to be 14? You're dealing with all those complex emotions. You're tiptoeing between childhood and adulthood. Before I became ill, I craved my independence. I wanted to be heard. I felt like no one around me understood me, and I'd often say exactly that and slam the door behind me. Suddenly, I could no longer tell the world to leave me alone because I had no words at all. I craved my independence, and now I had to rely on those around me to feed me, to change me, to bathe me. And worse still, there was absolutely no explanation as to why.
Once again, I am from Connecticut, and when my parents were married, the marital home was in Newtown, Connecticut. Sandy Hook is a suburb of Newtown. So, I always knew about Newtown. Newtown was Newtown was uh Mayberry in Andy Griffith's show. It was like, oh, hi Fred. Oh yes. See you at your son. It was like uh Willoughby almost. It was just so happy. But then at the end of the episode of Welcome to Willoughby, you realize what Willoughby was. And that's what happened on December 14, 2012. In January, I started stuttering all of a sudden. All of a sudden, I was in the store, completely fluent, and then and at the time, my aunt's other niece was in the hospital in a coma. So she grabbed back to in metaphorical sense, dragged me by the hair and brought me to the doctor and said, "You make sure she didn't have a stroke now." When you are on, I am on Social Security because I have my it used to be called Asperger's. Now it's ASD. I still say I have Asperger's because what Asperger's is a very mild case of autism, and that qualifies me for states aid. And when you are on states aid, you don't get seen very quickly. But I don't remember what day I went to the doctor's, but by the end of the week, I had my CAT scan. I mean, this is what I could only imagine what her family was thinking, and this is what my family was thinking. That was the first time I had my scan, and they saw absolutely nothing significant. Let's return to the video.
Why had I ended up this way? First, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and then medically unexplained symptoms. That's not a diagnosis at all. There's something medically wrong with you, we just don't know what. And I was sent for all of the usual diagnostic tests. All of them came back with no explanation. And as a result of that, some doctors told me I was faking it. I was a teenager wanting attention. Others told me that I would never walk or talk again, and that I would never recover. When I first went to speech therapy to begin to work on my speech, the normal techniques were not working. And so instead, my speech therapist got me to work on swear words. And I cannot tell you the sense of relief I found when I finally found my voice again. And more importantly, when I could first tell someone to fuck off again. I remember my first steps for the second time in my life when I was 19 years old. But it took me 5 years to receive an official diagnosis. And that diagnosis was functional neurological disorder, or FND. And living with FND really did shape my entire life. But I am not the only one. See, in my now nearly 10 years of working with those with FND.
Sorry, and I forgot to explain to you. When I brought up Sandy Hook, I originally thought I was just not getting over it. What happened? And all the stuff came out. But years later, I'm not happy it happened, but I'm not. A few years ago, I started enjoying Christmas again. For years, I did not care at all about Christmas. And a few years ago, I started enjoying Christmas again. So, no, it had nothing to do with what happened in Sandy Hook.
I have met and heard the stories of thousands of people with this condition. For example, the 20-year-old had a seizure at work and fell into a coma. She forgot her life from before and continues to do so every single day. Or the 35-year-old who had an epidural when they were in labor, fairly standard practice, but never regained the ability to walk or talk again. Or the many others who have suffered from viral infections, head injuries, psychological traumas, or physical injuries. One single incident completely transformed their entire lives. And worse still, all of those things are things that we are all exposed to every single day. This really could happen to any one of us. So in FND, this common condition, what happens is the surface of the brain still remains intact. So on the surface, the brain still looks like this magnificent work of art. It's the inner workings, the billions of neurons that become dysfunctional. A stressor, a trigger, a trauma, whether that is a psychological illness, a viral infection, or an injury, affects the way those billions of neurons work. You can imagine it a bit like being like a mobile phone. On the surface, the phone looks fine. It's working. There's no cracks or dents on the screen. But if the battery runs low, suddenly the programs and apps don't start to work as they should. They begin to crash and become dysfunctional. Perhaps they even begin to impact upon the other areas of the phone. In FND, the brain has become flat, dysfunctional, disconnected, and unable to work as it should. But this is not a rare condition that I am talking about. This is very common. In fact, FND is the second most common diagnosis in neurology settings. The symptoms of FND vary from person to person because the brain is so unique and based on our experiences.
My goodness. So she said she couldn't talk and was paralyzed. I was never that bad, but I used to I'm doing good now. I don't need my cane, and I'm not walking like I freshly just had a stroke. But that's how I felt last year too, and around this time, and it's March 25th, 2024, I was pretty much good around this time as well. And then when the summer hit, I had to bring up the cane. So that's where we're gonna stop, and I was in my wheelchair. Okay, just let that sink in, and I was in my wheelchair. Functional neurological disorder. Slurred or stuttering speech, that's me. Movement disorders. Prevalence dissociative non-epileptic seizures account for about 1 in 7 referrals to neuro after initial seizure, and functional weakness has a similar prevalence to multiple sclerosis. Controversy. There was historically much controversy surrounding the FND diagnosis. Many doctors continue to believe that all FND patients have unresolved traumatic events, often of a sexual nature, which are being expressed in a physical way. However, some doctors do not believe this to be the case. Wesley and White have argued that FND may merely be FND remains a stigmatized condition in the healthcare setting. So you can see why it took so long to get help. Multiple sclerosis has some overlapping symptoms with FND, potentially a source of misdiagnosis. And there you have it. Pretty much why I screw up a lot of my videos. But it was good to get it out, just to explain to you, and hopefully get some traction to this disorder. Have a good day, and I will be returning to my gaming.